Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the most brutal, blood-soaked blades that stalked the American frontier. And no, it wasn't just the Bowie knife you've heard about a million times. These were the knives that slit throats in back-alley brawls, gutted buffalo on the plains, and decided the outcome of saloon showdowns when bullets ran dry. Get ready, because some of these blades will destroy everything you thought you knew about life and death in the Wild West. These weren't just tools for hunting or skinning game. In the wrong hands, they were silent killers. Gamblers' daggers hidden in boots, scalp knives carried into raids, and butcher blades sharp enough to drop a man in a heartbeat. From crude blacksmith-forged iron to elegant Dirks smuggled into poker halls, these knives weren't backup weapons. They were the last thing many cowboys, outlaws, and lawmen ever saw. So buckle up, because by the end of this list, you'll see why the Wild West wasn't just about blazing six-shooters. It was just as much a world of cold steel. Number 15, homemade blacksmith knives, the frontier's brutal originals. Picture walking into a saloon brawl with nothing more than a knife hammered out of scrap iron. No polished steel, no factory stamp, just a crude hunk of sharpened metal forged by the local blacksmith from wagon springs, files, or broken farm tools. On the frontier, these weren't showpieces. They were weapons born of necessity. Cheap, brutal, and terrifyingly effective. Every settlement had its own blacksmith, and with them came an endless supply of specials. Some were oversized butcher-style blades, others resembled short swords, and many were jagged creations that looked like they belonged in a slaughterhouse, more than on a gambler's vest. But make no mistake, in the right hands, these improvised knives could kill just as quickly as a Colt peacemaker. Frontier records mention miners in Deadwood and Dodge City pulling these crude knives in drunken disputes, while lawmen noted how often they turned up at crime scenes. They were everywhere, under coats, in boots, or strapped to saddles. And because no two were exactly alike, you never knew if you were facing a dull farm tool or a razor-edge killer that could slip between ribs like butter. That unpredictability was what made them so feared. Outlaws and townsfolk alike knew a blacksmith blade could end a man as quickly as any factory weapon. They may not have carried the fame of the Bowie, but blacksmith-forged knives carved just as much blood into the dirt of the American frontier. And if these crude killers were only the beginning, the knives that followed would raise the stakes to an entirely new level. Number 14, California Gold Rush miners' knives, the prospector's lifeline. Imagine standing in a muddy mining camp in 1850. Surrounded by desperate men who'd staked everything on striking gold. In this lawless environment, a sturdy knife wasn't just a tool, it was survival itself. California gold rush miners carried oversized, hand-forged blades for digging, prying, and cutting through rock and timber. But when claim jumpers or thieves came calling, those same knives turned from utility tools into lethal weapons. These weren't delicate pieces of craftsmanship. Many were crude, heavy, and built to endure the harshest punishment. Thick spines for leverage, broad blades for chopping, and grips wrapped in rawhide or wood. A single swing could crack bone, split timber, or drop a rival miner in a heartbeat. Contemporary newspapers reported countless brawls where knives settled disputes faster than pistols ever could. In isolated diggings where gunpowder and ammunition were scarce, knives were always at hand, strapped to a belt, shoved in a boot, or tucked in a bedroll. Their presence was constant, and their lethality undeniable. What made miners' knives especially dangerous was their dual identity. By day, they were digging tools. By night, they were implements of violence. A man could walk openly with one on his hip and draw no suspicion, until it flashed in the firelight during a drunken poker fight. For every gold nugget pulled from the earth, there seemed to be a grave dug nearby by one of these frontier blades. Crude but dependable, miners' knives remind us that in the Wild West, the line between work and warfare was razor thin. And if the miners' blades were dangerous in their simplicity, the knives carried by professional duelists and gamblers would make them look almost civilized. Number 13, Civil War bayonet knives, the battlefield leftovers. When the smoke of the Civil War cleared, thousands of surplus weapons made their way westward. Among them were bayonets, long steel blades designed to turn rifles into spears. But out on the frontier, few settlers had use for military drill. Instead, these bayonets were hacked down, reforged, and reborn as some of the deadliest fighting knives the Wild West ever saw. These bayonet knives were brutal in their simplicity. Heavy, often over a foot long, they were carried by ex-soldiers, drifters, and settlers who valued reach and intimidation over finesse. A bayonet blade could split a skull, gut a horse thief, or pin an enemy against a wall with a single thrust. For men hardened by war, using them in mining camps, cattle towns, and saloon fights was second nature. Newspapers in Kansas and Texas told of veterans brandishing these blades in drunken disputes, their sheer size and military look enough to send rivals backing away. Unlike smaller knives, bayonet blades carried the psychological weight of the battlefield. Facing one in a cramped saloon must have felt like staring down a piece of the war itself. Their drawbacks were obvious: heavy, ungainly, and difficult to conceal. But those very traits made them terrifying when drawn. You couldn't mistake a bayonet knife for anything but a weapon meant to kill. Outlaws and lawmen alike carried them, knowing a single swing could end a fight before it began. From the ashes of America's bloodiest conflict, these recycled bayonets carved their own legend on the frontier. But while soldiers turned surplus steel into survival weapons, professional duelists were demanding blades designed from the start to kill men in the shadows. Number 12. Daggers and Stilettos, the duelist's choice. Picture the smoke-filled back room of a frontier saloon, where fortune shifted on the turn of a card and tempers flared with every lost hand. In these tight, dangerous spaces, a revolver was too slow, too loud, and too obvious. That's where daggers and stilettos came in. Slim, double-edged killers designed for one purpose: to slide between ribs before a man could even shout. Imported from Europe and carried by gamblers, duelists, and professional killers, these blades were the definition of silent lethality. A stiletto's needle-like point could pierce through heavy totes and waistcoats, while broader daggers offered devastating slashing power at arm's length. They were small enough to hide in a boot, sleeve, or vest pocket, yet large enough to end a life in an instant. The presence of these knives gave saloons an edge of constant tension. Any argument over a hand of cards or a spilled drink could erupt into sudden violence. A gambler drawing a stiletto didn't need to shout, didn't need to posture. One quick thrust, and the fight was over, before anyone else at the table had time to react. Lawmen feared these knives precisely because they left so little warning. Unlike a revolver, which gave opponents the chance to draw in response, a dagger strike was instant and often fatal. Many city ordinances in frontier towns banned them outright, considering them weapons of assassins rather than honest fighters. Daggers and stilettos prove that in the Wild West, not all killers walked down the street at high noon. Some waited in the shadows with blades so discreet you wouldn't know the fight had started until it was already over. And if these hidden blades terrified lawmen, the next knives would terrify entire cultures, weapons carried into raids and remembered in blood-soaked legend. We've gone deep into archives and first-hand accounts to bring you these forgotten frontier weapons. And trust me, digging up this history isn't easy. If you're finding this valuable, a quick like goes a long way in helping us keep these stories alive. And if you want more hidden legends of the Wild West, make sure to subscribe. We've got plenty more cold steel and gunpowder myths coming your way. Number 11. Throwing and belt knives, the fast draw backups. On the frontier, not every fight allowed time to draw a revolver. That's where throwing and belt knives came in. Small, versatile blades designed to be snatched from the hip or hurled across a room in a heartbeat. Cowboys, trappers, and outlaws alike carried these as constant companions, knowing that in a sudden scuffle, speed often mattered more than caliber. Unlike the massive Bowie or Arkansas Toothpick, these knives were compact and balanced. A man could wear 2 or 3 along his belt without drawing suspicion, each one ready to serve as a tool, a backup weapon, or, in the right hands, a deadly projectile. Skilled throwers could stick a target at 15 feet, while others use them at close range for quick slashes and barroom brawls. Famous mountain men were known to practice knife throwing for sport, but in saloons, the game turned serious. Eyewitness accounts describe disputes ending when a knife suddenly appeared in an opponent's shoulder, chest, or even hand before a pistol could clear its holster. These moments weren't about elegance. They were about lightning speed and shock value. Lawmen dreaded the unpredictability. A revolver gave warning. A thrown knife gave none. And while not every frontier fighter was a skilled thrower, simply having a blade ready on your belt made opponents think twice. Even when used up close, these knives could catch an adversary off guard faster than fumbling with black powder and percussion caps. Throwing and belt knives were proof that sometimes the smallest blade on a man's hip carried the deadliest surprise. But if these quick-draw backups kept saloons tense, the next knives carried entire cultures' fearsome reputations. Blades designed not for utility, but for the bloody ritual of taking scalps. Number 10. Mexican Navaja folding knives, the vaquero's secret. Long before the Colt became the symbol of the West, another weapon was striking fear in saloons and cantinas, the Navaja. Imported from Spain and Mexico, these folding knives weren't pocket-sized tools. They were massive, often stretching over a foot when opened, with curved blades, perfect for both slashing and stabbing. Mexican vaqueros and drifters carried them as daily companions, equally useful for cutting rope on the range or settling disputes in the heat of an argument. Their folding design allowed them to be carried discreetly, but when snapped open, they locked into place with a menacing click that sent a clear message. This fight would be decided in steel. Frontier gamblers also prized Navajas, smuggling them into poker halls where firearms were often checked at the door. Eyewitnesses wrote of brawls ending in seconds as the flash of a Navaja blade cut through a crowded room. Unlike bulky revolvers, these knives could be concealed, drawn, and used before opponents even knew what was happening. What made them especially feared was their unpredictability. A Navaja could be carried openly as a utility knife, but in the hands of a practiced fighter, it became an assassin's weapon. In many Mexican towns, laws were passed to curb their use, but the reputation only spread further across the border, seeping into Texas, New Mexico, and California. The Navaja proved that the Wild West wasn't shaped by American steel alone. Spanish blades left their mark just as deeply. And if these knives turned cantinas into killing grounds, the weapons hidden up gamblers' sleeves would make the frontier's card tables even deadlier. Number 9. Gamblers, Daggers, and Dirks, the saloon killers. Step into a crowded poker hall in Dodge City or Deadwood, where fortunes changed on the fall of a card, and tempers snapped as quickly as a twig. In this world, concealed daggers and dirks were the gambler's insurance policy. Slim, easily hidden blades designed to strike fast and end disputes before pistols ever cleared leather. Unlike the long Bowie or Arkansas Toothpick, these knives were built for speed and concealment. Many were barely 6 to 8 inches long, slim enough to hide in a boot, slip under a coat sleeve, or nestle in a vest pocket. The element of surprise was everything. In the chaos of a poker fight, a gambler could flip his wrist and drive a dirk into an opponent's chest before anyone else at the table even realized the game had turned violent. Court records from frontier towns tell of countless deaths tied to unlawful dirks, so many that city ordinances specifically banned them. Lawmen despised these knives because they stripped away the chance for defense. A revolver duel gave a man at least a second to react. A concealed dirk gave none. The psychological effect was just as powerful. Everyone in a saloon knew gamblers carried hidden blades, which made every argument, every raised voice feel like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Even a losing hand of cards could turn fatal when a slim blade flashed across the table. Gamblers' daggers and dirks weren't just weapons, they were the silent killers of the saloon era, blades that thrived on deception and speed. And if these knives terrified frontier gamblers, the next blades would spread fear across entire cultures, traded, carried, and wielded in bloody clashes that scarred the West forever. Number 8. Indian trade knives, Sheffield-Made, the blades of two worlds. When European traders pushed deeper into North America, they didn't just bring beads and rifles. They brought knives. Mass-produced in Sheffield, England, these trade blades were some of the most widely distributed weapons of the 19th century. By the time of the Wild West, they had become essential tools and terrifying weapons, carried by native warriors, trappers, and settlers alike. The design was simple, but deadly. A slim, straight blade, around 8 to 10 inches long, usually with wooden scales pinned to the tang. They were cheap, easy to sharpen, and rugged enough to handle both frontier chores and combat. Their ubiquity made them as common on the plains as tomahawks and muskets. For Native Americans, these knives became more than tools. They were status symbols, war weapons, and trade currency. Plains warriors carried them into raids, sometimes hanging them from decorated sheaths, other times strapping them directly to their belts for quick access. Trappers and fur traders, too, relied on them for skinning animals, cutting rope, or fighting off attacks in remote wilderness outposts. What made them especially dangerous was their accessibility. A revolver was expensive. A Sheffield knife could be had for a fraction of the cost. This meant that almost anyone, from a warrior on horseback to a teenage settler, might have one within reach. And in close-quarters combat, that cheap blade could kill as effectively as any Bowie. The Indian trade knife embodied the frontier's merging of cultures. A British blade carried into American legends, both feared and relied upon on every side of the frontier struggle. And if these trade knives spread violence across two worlds, the next blades would become infamous for a single chilling purpose. Number 7. Scalping knives, the most feared frontier blades. Few weapons carried as much terror on the frontier as the scalping knife. Slim, Razor sharp and designed for one grim purpose, these blades became symbols of brutality in the clash between native tribes, settlers, and soldiers. Unlike the heavy Bowie or the broad skinner's knife, scalping blades were narrow and precise, honed to cut quickly through flesh and hair in a single, practiced motion. Frontier accounts are filled with chilling references to them. Plains warriors carried Sheffield trade knives and other slender blades specifically ground for scalping, often tied to decorated sheaths or worn openly as marks of status. Their presence was enough to rattle even seasoned soldiers. Survivors of raids described the mere glimpse of scalping knives as sparking panic. Men fought not only for their lives, but for their very dignity in death. Settlers and frontiersmen also adopted the term, often calling any slim, sharp knife a scalper. Whether in warfare or simple intimidation, the reputation of these blades was as powerful as their edge. Even when they weren't drawn, the knowledge of what they represented was enough to keep tensions high across the frontier. But scalping knives weren't just weapons of war. They were psychological tools. Soldiers and scouts knew that the threat of being taken for a trophy could break morale faster than bullets. Their legacy made them one of the most infamous knives in American history, etched into both native tradition and settler fear. They proved that a knife didn't need size to be deadly, only precision and purpose. And if scalping knives terrified soldiers on the battlefield, the next blade would dominate the hunting grounds, carving its place as the brutal tool of the buffalo hunter. Number 6. Buffalo Skinner's Knife, the Hunter's Butcher. Where millions of bison once thundered across the horizon, hunters carried a blade built for one task: stripping hide from the biggest game in North America. The buffalo skinner's knife, with its broad, curved blade, became the signature tool of the professional hidemen, who turned the bison slaughter into a booming industry. But in the chaos of frontier life, this butcher's tool proved just as deadly against men as it was against beasts. Designed with a wide belly and heavy edge, the skinner's knife could peel an entire buffalo hide in minutes. Hunters carried them by the dozen, worn down to stubs from endless use on the plains. But when rival outfits clashed over hunting grounds, or when raiders attacked, those same knives were turned outward, into weapons that could open a man's throat or gut an attacker in a single swing. Eyewitness accounts describe buffalo camps where arguments over hides or money escalated into bloody knife fights. Unlike long bowies, the skinner was compact and brutally efficient in close quarters, where a quick slash could decide the outcome before a revolver was even drawn. Its heavy curve meant it didn't just stab, it ripped. The psychological weight was immense. Everyone on the frontier knew what these knives were capable of. Seeing one drawn in a brawl was a reminder of the blood-soaked trade they came from. To face a skinner's knife wasn't just to face a weapon, it was to face the grim reality of the buffalo slaughter itself. The buffalo skinner's knife carved its reputation into the hunting grounds of the West. But if hunters carried these by the dozen, the blades that came next were carried by nearly everyone. Simple trade knives that became the very backbone of frontier survival. Number 5. The Hudson's Bay Company Trade Knife, the fur trader's companion. Long before cowboys roamed the prairies or buffalo hunters rode the plains, the Hudson's Bay Company trade knife had already carved its legend across North America. Slim, simple, and endlessly practical, these blades were the backbone of the fur trade, carried by voyageurs, trappers, native hunters, and frontiersmen from the Great Lakes to the Rocky Mountains. Typically 8 to 10 inches long, with straight, narrow blades and wooden grips, these knives were the definition of utility. They skinned beaver, cut rope, butchered game, and pried open crates. But make no mistake, when danger struck in the wilderness, they doubled as weapons capable of ending a fight in seconds. Their reach went far beyond mere survival. Traders and explorers wrote of Hudson's Bay knives being prized in negotiations, exchanged as currency, or decorated with intricate sheaths by native allies. For many communities, owning one was a mark of status, proof of connection to the lucrative trade routes that spanned the continent. What made them truly dangerous was their sheer ubiquity. If the Green River knife would later dominate the Buffalo Plains, the Hudson's Bay blade was already everywhere decades earlier. Every canoe, every trapline, every remote trading post had them by the dozen. In raids, disputes, or ambushes, they were always within reach. The Hudson's Bay knife was the quiet constant of the frontier, not flashy, not oversized, but utterly reliable. A blade that wrote its story in fur, blood, and survival. And if these trade knives formed the backbone of frontier life, the next blade on our list would become even more iconic, the Green River. the knife that defined the American West itself. Number 4. The Green River Butcher Knife, the frontier's everyman blade. If there was one knife you could find on almost every frontier belt, wagon, or saddlebag, it was the Green River Butcher Knife. Cheap, mass-produced, and brutally effective, it became the most widespread blade of the American West, as much a part of daily life as a revolver or a rope. Forged in Massachusetts by J. Russell & Company, these knives were shipped west in the thousands, sold to trappers, hunters, settlers, and soldiers. Their simple design, a broad, slightly curved blade with a sharp point, made them versatile enough to skin game, butcher livestock, carve wood, or fend off an attacker. They were so reliable that the phrase "up to Green River" entered frontier slang, meaning a job done perfectly. But behind that reputation for utility lay a darker legacy. Buffalo hunters carried Green Rivers by the dozen, using them to strip hides from carcasses until the handles were slick with blood. Miners and settlers carried them into saloons where drunken arguments ended in slashings as sudden and final as gunfire. Lawmen frequently listed them in coroner's reports, the murder weapon of choice in countless back-alley killings. Their strength wasn't just in the steel, but in their accessibility. At a time when a fine Bowie could cost weeks of wages, a Green River knife was cheap enough for anyone. That meant farmers, gamblers, drifters, and outlaws all carried the same blade, turning the humble butcher knife into one of the deadliest weapons on the frontier. The Green River knife was the blade of the people, practical, affordable, and everywhere. But as lethal as it was in countless hands, the next knife on our list was forged for one purpose alone: to win duels and settle scores: the Arkansas Toothpick. Number 3. The Arkansas Toothpick, the duelist's equalizer.
If the Bowie knife was the king of the frontier, the Arkansas Toothpick was its sinister twin. A blade forged not for work, but for killing men. Long, double-edged, and dagger-like, the toothpick earned its bloody reputation in the saloons and dueling grounds of the South before carving its way west. Typically measuring 12 to 18 inches in length, with a sharp point and straight symmetrical edges, the toothpick blurred the line between knife and short sword. Its design favored thrusting, deep, bone-piercing strikes that ended fights instantly, but its edges gave it a savage slashing power as well. Carried openly on the belts of riverboat gamblers, southern gentlemen, and frontier fighters, the toothpick was more than a weapon. It was a warning. Stories from river towns along the Mississippi told of disputes settled not with pistols, but with matched toothpicks, where men fought duels that ended in pools of blood on the cobblestones. Its reputation spread so quickly and with such carnage that states like Arkansas and Louisiana passed some of America's first anti-knife laws specifically targeting toothpicks and Bowies. But outlawing them only heightened their allure. Carrying one was a badge of toughness and defiance. To face a toothpick wasn't to face a utility blade or a skinner's tool. It was to face a weapon designed for one purpose: to kill your opponent clean and quick. Deadlier than most revolvers in a close fight, the toothpick became the blade of choice for men who wanted reach, intimidation, and lethality all in one. But as feared as the toothpick was, it could never quite eclipse the weapon it was modeled after, because standing above them all was the most legendary knife of the Wild West: the Bowie. Number 2. The classic Bowie knife, the frontier legend. No knife is more closely tied to the mythology of the American frontier than the Bowie. Born in blood at the infamous sandbar fight of 1827, where Jim Bowie carved his name into legend, this blade became the most famous knife in American history. On the Wild West frontier, to own a Bowie was to carry a symbol of raw power, survival, and fear. The classic Bowie design featured a broad blade, usually 9 to 15 inches long, with a distinctive clip point and a razor-sharp edge. Heavy enough to chop wood, yet agile enough for a duel, the Bowie was the ultimate all-purpose frontier weapon. It could butcher game, split firewood, or end a man's life with a single thrust. Gunfighters, lawmen, and outlaws all prized it. Many carried a Bowie as their constant backup, strapped to a belt or hidden under a coat, ready for the moment when a revolver jammed or a fight came too close for gunfire. Its psychological power was immense. Just the sight of a Bowie handle peeking from a gambler's sash or a ranger's belt was enough to make men think twice. But the Bowie wasn't only a weapon, it was a cultural icon. Blacksmiths across the frontier produced countless variations, some crude, others works of art with ornate guards and ivory grips. From Texas Rangers to riverboat gamblers, the Bowie became a mark of status, a weapon that told the world its owner was no easy target. The Bowie knife's reputation was so widespread that lawmakers attempted to ban its carry in several states, branding it too deadly for civilized society. Yet the bans only cemented its fame. By the time of the Wild West, the Bowie was more than a knife. It was the knife.
But for all its notoriety, there was one final evolution that pushed the Bowie beyond legend. Massive, custom-forged fighting blades that stood unmatched as the deadliest knives of the American frontier. Number 1, the true custom Bowie, the king of knives. At the very top of the frontier's hierarchy of steel stood not the factory-made Bowies sold by the dozen, but the massive, custom-forged fighting knives created by master blacksmiths. These were the true Bowies, oversized, perfectly balanced, and designed with one purpose: to kill swiftly and decisively. Unlike the more standardized versions, custom Bowies could stretch well over 15 inches, with thick spines, sweeping clip points, and hand-shaped guards to protect the wielder's fingers in brutal, close-quarters combat. They weren't tools or hunting knives. They were bespoke weapons, crafted to the specifications of professional fighters, lawmen, and killers who demanded the very best. Jim Bowie himself was said to have commissioned such blades, heavy enough to sever a man's arm, sharp enough to shave with, and durable enough to split bone. On the frontier, owning a true custom Bowie was like strapping on a personal death sentence for anyone foolish enough to challenge you. These blades inspired awe and dread in equal measure. Legends grew around them. Some blacksmiths forged their own signatures into the steel, making their Bowies as recognizable as a gunsmith's revolver. Owners carried them proudly, often with ornate grips of bone, silver, or ivory, but beneath the decoration lay a weapon that could end a fight before it truly began. The custom Bowie represented the peak of knife fighting on the frontier, the deadliest combination of craftsmanship, intimidation, and raw lethality ever carried on a man's hip. From the muddy banks of the Mississippi to the dusty streets of Texas towns, it was the ultimate blade of the Wild West. These weren't just knives, they were the kings of cold steel, the blades that defined life, death, and legend on the American frontier. From crude blacksmith specials to the legendary Bowie, these knives weren't just tools, they were the silent killers that shaped the Wild West. Each one tells a different story of survival, violence, and raw frontier ingenuity. So now we want to hear from you. Which of these blades surprised you the most? Were you expecting the Bowie to reign supreme, or did the sheer brutality of the Green River or Scalping Knives change the way you see the West? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from fellow history buffs who live for these forgotten details. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the deadliest knives of the frontier, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us keep uncovering these gritty stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more journeys into the myths, weapons, and legends that defined America's most dangerous era. Until next time, keep exploring.